Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the participants here in the room, to our distinguished panelists, and to the participants joining us online. My name is Stephanie Borg-Psaila. I am the interim head of DiploFoundation and of the Geneva Internet Platform. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone, so welcome you in the room and welcome our participants online for today's webinar on water and armed conflicts. So today's discussion will tackle the elaboration of principles for the protection of water infrastructures in times of armed conflicts and in post-conflict situations. And we will also hear about the implementations of the recommendations of the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace. And the recommendations were made in the seminal report of 2017, A Matter of Survival. It is my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished panelists. We have engineer François Münger. He's the director of the Geneva Water Hub, and he's the former head of the SDC's Global Water Program. We also have Dr. Mara Tignino. Dr. Tignino is the coordinator of the Platform for International Water Law and reader at the Faculty of Law and Institute of Environmental Sciences of the University of Geneva. So thank you for joining us today. Before I give the floor to our distinguished panelists, I'll also mention that today's webinar is being organized within the framework of the distance learning course on international water law and the law of transboundary aquifers, which is delivered through the Continuing Education and E-Learning Center of the University of Geneva. And in fact, the participants here that we have today with us in Geneva are participants of this course. And Geneva is actually where we're hosting this webinar from. To our participants in the room and our participants online, we will first have the interventions from François and Mara, and then after both interventions, we will open the floor for questions and comments. So participants here in the room, take note of your questions and comments because we'll save them for the end. There will be a space for that. And to our online participants, there is a space on the online platform at the bottom where you can immediately type in your questions and your comments, and my colleague Marco Lotti here will be the bridge between you following us online and our panelists here in the room. So with that introduction, I'll give the floor to François to hear more about the recommendations made by the panel. François, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to see, okay. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are here, it's because you know that water is one of the major challenges of this century. Next slide, please. I can do it myself. Sorry. You know the complexity of water. Water is transsectorial. Water is indispensable for agriculture. We have a big problem of contamination of water. We never pollute so huge amount of water that now. And since 5 or 6 years, the World Economic Forum of Davos is positioning water as one of the main challenge, global challenge for the century. Our main water resources are transboundary. The large majority of our lake and rivers are transboundary. 99% of our water resources are in the aquifers, and 270 of the biggest aquifers of the world are also transboundary. But at the local level, we also see the emergence of new intersectorial conflict, as for example, between mining, extraction, and local agriculture, mining, extraction, and water use for drinking water in various parts of the world. And in different level, we have more and more warning of the risk of water conflict. On the other side, water is also a tool for cooperation and for collaboration. Water flow from a country to another, water flow between a user to another. So this is also an instrument for cooperation. And it is with this positive vision that we have created the Geneva Water Hub and also the high-level panel on water and peace that I will explain a little more before. The Geneva Water Hub is, has three main functions, and a few words. The first function is a function of networking. We are positioning in Geneva. Geneva is 170 mission to the UN, so it's an extremely good place to position this question of water conflict, also water cooperation worldwide. We have also a strong capacity in terms of education and research, and we are also a think tank where we try to influence and to tackle specific hot question and aspect concerning water and peace, water and conflict. To exert our influence at the global level, we have various international platforms where we are, that we have induced or where we are present. And one of these is certainly the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace. This panel, next slide, this panel is formed of by 15 countries. The 15 co-convening countries have nominated panelists, and it has been launched in the 16th of November in Geneva. The purpose of the panel was to develop a set of proposals to reinforce the global framework to prevent and resolve water conflict, to facilitate the use of water as an important factor of building peace, and also to examine the relevance of water issues in national and global policy making. We are the Geneva Water Hub, the secretary of this panel, and we also had the support of the Strategic Foresight Group, which is a think tank in Mumbai. You have here the list of the 15 panelists. The chair of the panel is Danilo Turk, former president of the Republic of Slovenia, and we have two vice chairs, a minister of hydraulic of Senegal, and a former Minister of Energy and Environment from Costa Rica. We have here all the list of the panelists. They are all former political personality or personality from the academic sector or private sector or even civil society or public sector. Here you have the first picture of the panelist, and the panel prepared his recommendation in four main segments, four main meetings. The first one in Geneva, the second one in Dakar. In Dakar, we were particularly interested on the question of the Senegal River Commission, which is an example at the global level. After that, we had a session in Costa Rica, where we are more on the discussion on the local conflict, the conflict that I mentioned between, for example, in this case, the construction of a dams and the reaction of the local population. At the end, we had the last session in Amman, and in Amman, one of the key topics was really the question of water and refugees for the specific situation and specific role that Jordan is playing in this direction. We have presented the recommendation of the panel in 2017. The panel has been able to make all this work in 2 years, as it was planned. which is relatively exceptional comparatively to various other similar initiatives. We present this in Geneva. We presented this also in a group of friends here in Geneva, where 40 countries are represented. We were also in the World Water Forum, and we present also this recommendation to the UN Secretary General in New York. And the Secretary General said, yes, it is, for him it was clear that the panel played a specific role between two agendas, the peace agenda and the development agenda. And water is certainly a bridge between these two agendas. And here in Geneva, we have also a strong capacity in these two agendas. The document is structured around 7 chapters. The first one, the drama of water, is an explanation of the problematic. The second one is water in armed conflict. I will develop this a little more in Mara after that. The third chapter is on the convention, international laws, which give a good frame to tackle this question of water and peace and security. Also a strong recommendation of the panelists to the ratification of this convention. So chapter 4 is on quantity and quality. Now a large majority of the treaties are just on quantity, allocation of quantity of water. But we have more and more a problem of quality, and quality has to be included now in on this question. It's also the question of the aquifers. 99 or 98% of the reserve of water are in the aquifers, and we are relatively weak in terms of treaties on the aquifers. On the approximately 300 aquifers, we just have 7 treaties or 7 aquifers which has signed an agreement. This means that in comparison of the river, we have still a lot to do. The chapter 5 is on the question of the local conflict. We name this the people diplomacy, and one of the main recommendations is to create or to try to induce a code of conduct for international companies to respect water, and code of conduct in front of the use of water in their work worldwide. And we are working on this question also. So chapter 6 is on financing. Because now, if we all agree, I believe, that cooperation reduces the risk, so the cooperation will have to receive a financial support and recognition. It's not the case now. If you cooperate or not cooperate, for example, the loan of the international bank are the same. This means that cooperation is not recognized as a reduction of the risk, and we have now to be inventive in terms of new mechanism for financing to induce the cooperation. And the last chapter is on the aspect of diplomacy, and the recommendation of the panel is the creation of a global observatory on water and peace, and also to associate to this observatory safe space to tackle hot subject, as for example now one hot subject is filling of the dams. We have big dams worldwide. How to fill these dams? In 30 years, in 20 years, this could change a lot of impact, or other questions that this safe space could be used. Also for the preparation of project before to have a bankable project. Now I go to the chapter 2, which is this water in not as a source of conflict, but water in armed conflict. We have two segments of recommendation. The first one address recommendation to the Security Council, the highest level, we could say, inside of the UN. And one recommendation to recognize water as a vital asset of humanity. Also to reinforce the implementation of international humanitarian law and encourage also water supply ceasefire. Water has also to be part of the plan of reconstruction. A second group of recommendations are to create an independent international body to get information about destruction on water supply systems, and also a mechanism to monitor compliance with international humanitarian law and reparation to victims. These are the main recommendations of the panel on this chapter, Water in Armed Conflict, and the work that will be developed by my colleague Mara and various partners are definitively key to support this development. Because if we ask the Security Council, we try to induce the Security Council treat this question of water, peace, and security, and the question of the infrastructure, this council need to know what we are speaking about. What kind of infrastructure we have to protect, and this is the subject of this list that you are working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, François, for taking us through the report. And you have already introduced Chapter 2. And as you were saying, Mara will go deeper into the list of principles as one of the recommendations of this chapter. So immediately we'll give the floor to you. Any questions and comments, we'll save them for now. Online participants, you can still pose the questions and the comments in the appropriate field on the platform. But I'll now give the floor to Mara to take us through the proposal.
So thank you, Stephanie. It is, would like to thank DiploFoundation for hosting us, and it's also a pleasure to see my students from the University of Geneva and to be connected with the participants of the distance learning course. So you have already heard about the recommendations of the panel, and in particular I'm with a group of researchers and universities and international organizations. We are working in the development of a list of principles on the protection of water infrastructure in relation to armed conflict. So the list will include principles of international humanitarian law, but also other areas of international law like human rights law, international water law, and international environmental law. So we used also the term of in relation to armed conflict to include different situations like international armed conflict, non-international armed conflict, or the situation of occupation, and also to give to stress the fact that we should focus not only during the armed conflict but also the protection of water infrastructure after a conflict. Next slide, please. So here you can, next slide, please. You can see the recommendations of the panel. So our project on the list of principles, it is based on these recommendations, also other more specific, but we can say the basis of the project, it is a request to a better implementation and respect for international humanitarian law, and in particular for the protection of water. Next slide, please. So what is the content of the list? It is, as I said earlier, the principles and rules of international humanitarian law, so in particular, as we will see, the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, but also, for example, the considerations of humanity included in the Martin's Clause. And so we will look at the customary norms of international law, but also conventional law. So the objective is not to create a new law on the protection of water infrastructure during armed conflict and after armed conflict, but to restate the existing law, to look at the existing norms also in the light of the existing practice. So we will take into account also the work of the International Law Commission related to the protection of the environment, so how to link the list of principles with this work of this body of the United Nations. And as I said, the objective it is to support the implementation of international humanitarian law in relation to water. Next slide, please. So what is our methodology to develop this list of principles? We will take into account the travaux préparatoires of the additional protocols, and also all the work of the International Committee of the Red Cross related to customary international humanitarian law. And as I said, so we will not look only at international humanitarian law, but also other areas of international law, as human rights law, international water law. And an important aspect also of our list of principles, it is that it is based on a partnership with different actors, and we count on them to develop a solid list of principles. Next slide, please. What is the current law on the protection of water infrastructure? As I said, the general principles of international humanitarian law. So we have a basic principle, that is the principle of distinction. So water infrastructure are considered as a civilian object, and even when in certain circumstances they are considered as military objectives, the belligerents, also non-state armed groups, should have to consider the principle of proportionality. And what does it mean, the principle of proportionality? For example, if we have an attack against a military objective, like an industrial facilities that is causing a damage to water resources, this is called collateral damage, but it must be prevented, the large impact on these natural resources, or also a water infrastructure providing water to the civilian population. And also, when we consider the principle of proportionality, there is another principle that protects the access to water, that it is the principle of precautions. So the principle of precaution, it obliges the parties to a conflict to take precautionary measures to prevent the collateral impact on the civilian population or on the civilian object. Next slide. Then we have specific provisions on the protection of water that are included in the first protocol on international armed conflict and the second protocol on non-international armed conflict, and we have a specific protection on water infrastructure, and another specific provision on dams and dikes, and also there is an annex to the first protocol on international armed conflict related to the obligation of an international sign on dams and dikes. Next. Other areas of international law, what is interesting it is that in some conventions of international law, like the Convention of 1997 on the law of non-navigational uses of international water courses, there is a specific provision on international humanitarian law, so a direct reference to another areas of international law. Next slide. So the code of the list of principles want also to deal with some weaknesses that we see in the protection of water infrastructure. For example, we will take into consideration the issue of the control of dams that is becoming more frequent in armed conflict, and also the prevention of collateral damage to water infrastructure, in particular the fact that some infrastructure can have a dual use, so can be used for civilian or military purposes, and the reverberating effects, so not only the direct or the indirect impact that are caused by military operations against the water infrastructure, but also effects that are more we can see more distant from the attacks. For example, the fact that a military operation against a water infrastructure can provoke also over the time an impact on the health of the population. And then we will consider also the impact to other installations like industrial facilities that can have an impact, as I said, on water resources. And also we will include the importance to include the water impact assessment. So until now we have environmental impact assessment, and we would like to stress the importance to consider the impact on water. And of course we will consider the issue of the rights and obligations of non-state actors. Next slide. So what are the challenges that are addressed by the list of principles? It is the fact that increasingly conflicts take place in urban context. So here there is the issue of direct, indirect impact, but also reverberating effects on the civilian population. The fact that conflicts are becoming more and more long during over the years, and of course the issue to increase the implementation of international humanitarian law. So the next slide, please. The last one. So how the list will contribute to peace, that it is also the main objective of the Geneva Water Hub, so to increase the issue of water as an instrument of peace. There cannot be a lasting peace without ensuring access to water to the population. So we believe that water must be left outside of the armed conflicts, and there is also a need to consider not only what it happens during the conflict, but also after an armed conflict. And as François said, it is also important to ensure this water ceasefire during a conflict to allow the water engineers, for example, to repair water conflict. So, sorry, I have one last slide that it is not the proposal of the panel to establish or use an existing mechanism to promote the implementation of international humanitarian law related to water. And here the proposal it is to use this mechanism to gather the information on the on cutting, for example, water supplies, and also to support if we will find an appropriate mechanism to ensure the compliance with international humanitarian law, and also to cooperate with international organizations to increase the post-conflict assessments on the negative impact of armed conflict on water resources. So many thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mara, for taking us through the recommendations and the list of principles linked to Chapter 2. I have just a question for each by way of introducing the section on comments and the questions. Mara, you mentioned in the last slide that one of the recommendations is to either create or to tap into existing mechanisms. And my question is, are there any existing mechanisms that can actually be used, or do you think that it will necessitate the creation of a completely new mechanism? And for François, you mentioned at the end, perhaps not so much linked to the armed conflict, but at the end of your presentation, you mentioned the Global Observatory. So maybe can you reveal a few plans, or at what stage is the implementation of the Global Observatory? That struck me as very quite interesting. So I'll you can take the questions on these two at the moment, and then we'll open the floor.
Okay. Yes. Well, many thanks for your question. We are working on this, and so existing mechanism. I think that. The inquiry investigation mechanism that are working under the umbrella of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, they can be an instrument where the role of water can be strengthened. So maybe this inquiry commission, this existing mechanism that are put into place for specific conflict could give more importance on how to increase the protection of water. And then also I think to other human rights mechanism, for example, the mechanism established under the protocol on the Pact on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights of '66, where there is a reporting mechanism of state parties. So this can be also a manner, again, where we could put the focus on water. Then there is also another level, the International Criminal Court, but our objectives of the mechanism are different in comparison to international criminal law, but of course we could also have a role in gathering information that maybe one day could be used also by the International Criminal Court in assessing violation of international humanitarian law. So, for example, the systematic destruction of water supplies could be considered as a war crime. So this is thank you for the
Thank you, Mara.
question.
It's good to see that there are existing mechanisms that you can build the work on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Regarding observatory, François.
Thank you. Yes, the panel has various recommendations, and we will follow as a GHLPWP Water Hub to follow all the recommendations to see what is the future of this recommendation, because we'll certainly avoid that to have a panel which has recommendation without action. And the recommendation of the Global Observatory is a recommendation that the Geneva Water Hub itself wants to really be operational to implement it. This observatory will not be a new institution. We have enough institutions in the water sector. This observatory will be a network of existing institutions which will be a node of this observatory. And the purpose of the observatory will be first to be able to make analysis at the global level of the development of this question of water, peace and security, the good example, the risk also, and on certain aspect to make analysis as a panel, as make a first analysis. This means that to continue the work of the panel. So first, an analytical capacity. A second, a capacity to create safe space. This means a capacity in your region to facilitate cooperation around of water. That could be transboundary or, as I mentioned before, intersectorial cooperation. So this will be the observatory. And now we are in the beginning. The secretariat of the observatory will certainly be in Geneva, because, as I mentioned, it's a good place to have the secretariat. And we will have a node of the observatory in Senegal. We are already advanced with the government of Senegal to have a node in Senegal. We'll also have a node of the observatory in Latin America, in Jordan, and in Central America. But it's also something in building and in construction, and will certainly add capacity or other institution able to support this work of the observatory, as I said, analytical work, but also capacity to create safe space for water cooperation and to facilitate, reduce the risk of conflict. And of course, work as the list or the elaboration of a code of conduct for companies, or all the work also relies around of data to have more data to understand better the water conflict, will be also instrument that the observatory will work with.
Thank you, François. It's a very interesting concept, especially I find the part on the nodes very interesting, and perhaps we can learn from each other. And I'm saying this because the Geneva Internet Platform does actually have an observatory. Okay, the topic is completely different, so it's related to digital policy, but there are different models. So I think we can learn from each other. You also develop the observatory for water cooperation. So very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And now I'll give the floor to the participants here in the room for your questions and comments. So who would like to start? Any questions or comments here? All right, let's pause here and let's see whether we have questions or comments from the online participants. And Marco is nodding. So Marco, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Stephanie. I must say, quite a lively discussion online. Pity that they could not join us in situ. I compiled a couple of questions, well, actually a bit more, for the panelists in general, and I will start with those, and then for Mara specifically. A couple of reactions are from Malicia. She asked to elaborate further and clarify the selection criteria of the panelists for the high-level panel. And she's also asking what are some steps that can be taken to allow countries in existing conflicts, for example, border issues, to reach an agreement over their shared water resources. We have another question from Mena. He simply asked to clarify further on the link between water and peace, to elaborate a bit more on that. And he's also had an interesting reflection saying that I think politicians all over the world, especially in Africa, must be forced by international law to include their money in their manifestos to provide safe drinking water for its citizens. So maybe something to react on. And then a last general question from Atef is asking how can water resources planning, water recycling and intelligent use of fresh water be a tool for supporting permanent peace in the Middle East countries in the light of the climate change issue? And then we have a couple of more questions specifically to Mara. One is from Isegul, and I hope I'm pronouncing names correctly, so please do not, please correct me if I'm wrong online. He's saying, in context of the Geneva Water Hub being the secretariat of the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, she's asking, in the conflict situations, such as the Syrian civil war in the Tigris-Euphrates basin, what kind of new transboundary water governance principles and practices should the riparian states adopt themselves? How can the riparian states in such pivotal regions be engaged with the creation of the list of water-related infrastructures? She's quoting from the panel. Do you think the riparian states will adopt the list and work with the international independent body without resistance? And a last reaction from Chukwuekaba. Sorry for mispronouncing. How does the current situation in protection of water and conflict impact the settlement of disputes in armed conflict situations?
Thank you, Marco, for summarizing the questions and the comments. Perhaps, François, we can start from the work of the high-level panel and then zoom into the case studies. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. For the selection of the panelists, of course, we were the secretariat of the panel, and the panel has been decided by 15 co-governing countries. And the co-governing country became a co-governing country in nominated one panelist. And the recommendations that we had, it was to try to have all one former political personality, or to have a personality of the academic domain, and also balance of private sector and public sector and civil society. We also ask and try to have a balance between gender balance. We had just 2 women, but very strong women, and they balance definitively we have the gender balance with this through these 2 women. So this means that the recommendation was really to try to have influence person, in particular political personality, because for too long time the water sector is dominated by technical or scientific vision, but at the end it's the political people which take the decision. So for this it was also important to have this voice and this capacity of influence. So it's with these criteria that the panel has been created, and we had really a large balance of different interests and benefit. Also, we try to have a sensibility of different regions of the world.
Thank you, Mara. Would you like to elaborate maybe on the case studies that were mentioned?
Okay.
You can speak.
Yes. So the questions are quite challenging. So the first one, if I understood correctly, how riparian states in the basin of Tigris and Euphrates can be how we will they will react to the list, if I understood. Yeah. Mm.
Should adopt themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of infrastructures would they adopt the list without any resistance?
I think that in these countries the list could play an important role for the protection of dams, for example, but also electrical facilities. And as I said, the urban conflicts are increasingly they take place increasingly. So the importance of the list will be also to take into account these new challenges. Of course, I cannot. It is difficult to say now how these riparian states will react to the list. I think that we can say about that only after that we have when we will be when we will have advanced in the process of the list, and but. Yeah, I hope that this list will be considered as a useful tool for the protection of water in this region. In the second one, so it was related the impact of the list on dispute settlement mechanism. So also this is a challenging question of. I think that. We have a case now where there was an armed conflict and the case was brought to the International Court of Justice, like the case between Nicaragua and United States. And so in some cases also in this situation the traditional dispute settlement can play a role. And of course, also after an armed conflict, the dispute settlement mechanism can play a significant role. For example, we have the case of a claims commission between Eritrea and Ethiopia under the aegis of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and there an issue of the attacking a water infrastructure was an object of the case, and the Commission concluded to the violation of international humanitarian law. So I hope that I have answered to the two questions.
Thank you, Mara, and we'll see whether we have questions from the floor. While Marco, you can check if the questions were indeed answered, and if there are any follow-up questions or comments from our online colleagues. I'll again ask here whether there are questions or comments to the presentations here. Do we have a question? Maybe you can say your name, please, and ask the questions. Let me thank you, sir.
Hello, everybody. I'm Elodie Feijo. Thanks for your presentation. I have two questions. Can I ask both? Okay, so I think the first is for François Münger. You mentioned the creation of an international independent body to gather information on damaged infrastructure. And we know that very often in armed conflict, international body cannot access certain areas. So how do you plan to deal with that? Maybe partner with local organization, or how to gather data in an armed conflict? And my other question is for Mara. You mentioned the after conflict is also important, like to protect water infrastructure after conflict, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate a bit more on that, please.
Thank you. François or Mara, who would like to take the question? Yes, thank you.
If you agree, Mara, we respond to your two questions, and I will tackle the question of the rational water NPs, which is a question of an auditor.
So the first question, the access in the. Now you are right that in some areas humanitarian organizations do not have access. And so, as you said, I think that local organizations play an important role to support the maintenance or reparation of water infrastructure. Even it is very important to support this local organization that know the field even better than the international humanitarian assistance organization. Regarding the second question on post-conflict situation, I think here there are a few challenges already how to define the situation of post-conflict. So I think that from a legal point of view, as I said in the list, we would like to complement the international humanitarian law with other areas of international law so that they are applicable in all situations, in prevention of armed conflict, during an armed conflict, after an armed conflict. So it is complementarity between areas of international law will strengthen the protection of water in post-conflict. And then also I think the importance of the peace treaty. So it is important that these treaties include access to water, so among the provisions, and even when there is not a clear mention of water, the reference to economic, social, and cultural rights in general can provide a support to protect the access to water for the civilian population. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. You mentioned the peace treaty, and in fact, there was another comment, François, you were right, there was another comment asking for elaboration on the link between water and peace, and I think you were about to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. I think water is specific. Water is do not have substitute. We have substitute for energy. We have substitute for food, but we do not have substitute for water management. And we do not have a plan B for water. On the other hand, water is absolutely vital for people, but also for all the development. And for this, my first slide was on this use of water for agriculture, water for industry, water for development, and in general. And also, water is strongly included in all our culture. So for this, I think water has a specific vital role and can also force or induce the cooperation. I have an example on the Senegal River Commission. Senegal River Commission has a specific agreement, which is extremely interesting because the country owns a depth. They take, for example, for the construction of dams on the Senegal River. The dams is co-owned by the 4 countries on the Senegal River Commission. But the depths taken by the country is owned by each country. So each country take a part of the cost of the infrastructure, and when they receive the money from the bank or the international bank, they give the money to this commission for the construction and operation of the infrastructure. This means that the infrastructure is co-owned, but the depth is your depth as country. In the history, a conflict happened between Mauritania and Senegal. And Senegal and Mauritania closed all the international relation, and this conflict was extremely harmful conflict. But they maintained the relation on the Senegal River Commission. Why? Because Senegal and Mauritania was owner of the debts, and you have to pay your debts. You want also to have an influence in the co-management of the basin. So the unique source of relation during this conflict was the Commission on the Senegal River Commission. And we can really affirm that this commission has played a major role in the peace building and reconciliation between these two countries. It's just an example where the treaties arrangement around water could really induce peace. And now in Syria, for example, on the Oronte River, we have evidence that we already have people which make reconstruction together on the infrastructure. And this means that even in a very hard conflict, as it is the case, the local population rebuild the system for the irrigation, for drinking water. And it's on this aspect that the reconstruction has to be built, and we expect that the plan of reconstruction after the conflict will take this local reconstruction to in the big plan.
Thank you, François. I'll ask Marco whether there are any other follow-up comments or questions. Marco indicates that there are, so I'll give Marco the floor.
There are a couple of more reactions to the panelists in general. One is from Michael, and he's saying that ultimately all conflicts on water have a bearing on local communities. So do national laws recognize communities' rights to utilize community-based mechanisms or rules to resolve internal freshwater conflict? I don't know if to the panelists if you have any examples or any specific case. And a comment from Ngaka. He's saying, I'm from Lesotho, a country completely landlocked in the Republic of South Africa. We have a lot of clean water. In fact, we call it the white diamond of the kingdom. And surprisingly, the ordinary citizens find it almost impossible to access it. So he's asking, while the country supplies other countries with it at the same time, how best can small countries with this rare resource ensure that at least the agreements they get into with other countries regarding water are based on win-win cooperation? I suppose also for citizens.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you to our participants for the two comments. François or Mara, who would like to take?
Okay. Yeah, so the first question, it is the relationship between international and national laws, so how national law can avoid conflicts and working with local communities. Then I think that human rights law plays an important role. So the domestication of international law at the level of the state. So I think that international law and national law have to go hand in hand. And also at the level of the management of transboundary water resources, we have some principles like the equitable and reasonable use that we are currently studying at the online course. This principle derives from domestic law. So I think that for the implementation of international law, we need to have a basis in national law. Also, the adoption, for example, of water code. So, the second question: agreements. How the agreements are based on a win-win situation. I think that sometimes the agreements can freeze like asymmetrical situations we have in the Middle East and also on the Nile River. Some cases of treaties that are not win-win to all riparian countries. but the trend now it is really to have freshwater agreements that are based on general principles of international law that are included in the global conventions like the UNEC Water Convention of 1992 and the UN Water Courses Convention of 1997. So I hope that I have answered to the two questions.
Exactly. Thank you, Mara. Yes, exactly. So maybe our colleague from Lesotho can tell us whether that answers the question. I turn again to our participants here in the room. Any questions or follow-up comments on what we have heard so far? No, very good. Marco, any other questions or comments? I have a last one. Okay, we have an active online community. Marco?
We have one question from Chanta. He's saying, if one country does not join as a member of the UN Water Course, and that country as a dam collapse bring effect to the riparian country, can any UN agency be involved to deal with such problem?
Thank you, Marco. Mara, would you like to take that question? It's a specific case study. UN involvement.
So the question it is if a state is not party to the UN Water Courses Convention and there is a collapse of a dam, can the state have can have resort to UN organization for the reconstruction? Yes, I think of course it can. The UN Water Courses Convention includes general principles, and there is not a specific provision on the reparation of water installations, but of course there are obligations on the regulation of water installation to prevent the risk of damage to riparian states.
Thank you, Mara. If we don't have any further questions or comments from our online or our in situ participants, just one final operational, I would say, question, mainly for Mara. Mara, is there a time frame for the research that you're doing on the elaboration of principles?
Yes, there is. No, it is an ambitious project with an ambitious deadline. So we will have a zero draft in December, and we count to have to include the comments from our partners, and so to have a final version in January, February.
And will this zero draft be available for comments to the public, perhaps researchers working in the area?
Yes, the idea is in a first time to have comments from experts, and then also we will see with our partners how not to have a broader participation.
Okay, thank you, Mar. Yes.
Yes, perhaps as a commercial, no, you can mention the Peace Week, no, where you will have the first zero presentation, we could say zero draft of this zero draft of this list. Give the date.
So we will have on the 9th of November in the morning here at the WMO in Geneva. So the first presentation on the list, in particular the reasons why this list is important, and we have developed with UN Environment a map on some important cases around the world on the link between armed conflicts and water.
Thank you, Mara. And that would be during the Geneva Peace Week, which is happening in the second week of November, 5th till the 11th, if I'm not mistaken.
The 2nd to the 9th.
2nd to the 9th. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mara. Unless we have any other questions, it is the time to thank you for sharing your expertise here and telling us more about especially Chapter 2 of the seminal report. I thank the participants here in the room for joining us today, and of course the online participants for taking the time to join us online. We hope you found this webinar useful. We will have a second event in November tackling water law, water diplomacy. We will keep you up to date via the various Diplo, the Geneva Water Hub and the University of Geneva channels. So stay tuned, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.